Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell. I'm a member of the Quad Education team, and I'm thrilled you could all join us today for our webinar on what to expect during the summer and at the beginning of your senior year. We have a fantastic panelist here with us today who is a consultant for Quad Education and works with students and families on their college applications and the college application process. Yeah, thank you all for spending your Wednesday afternoon and evening with us. So today we're going to introduce our panelists. We'll go over a timeline and deadlines for summer and fall of your senior year. We'll talk about finalizing your college list, recommendation letters, finishing your personal statement, your senior year course load, staying organized, and then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout this process, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So unfortunately, we did have one of our panelists. One of our panelists is sick, so she's unable to join us today, but we do have Dominique, who is fantastic and will walk us through this topic amazingly. Dominique, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here. Like Hallie said, my name is Dominique. I am an admissions consultant here at Quad. So just like what she said, I work with students through their college applications, helping them through this entire process, which actually, if you're a junior right now, kind of starts right about now. And so I'll walk you through kind of step by step exactly what I will be doing with the students that I'm working with currently, starting now and all the way up through next November, December, when we start to submit college applications. So my experience, just to give you a brief overview with college admissions, started when I was in college at Dartmouth College. I was a tour guide there and I worked with the admissions office to show prospective students around the school. I was also able to work with prospective students as an alumna. I interviewed students for the admissions office and I kind of have some insight as to what they're looking for exactly in applicants from that perspective. And I've also coached high school students through my work in education in the public education system through all the way from 9th grade up through 12th grade, just kind of figuring out, what extracurriculars they should sign up for, advising them academically so that they are the strongest candidates when they do come out as seniors. And so I'm happy to be here with you all. And let's go ahead and get started walking through the process.
All right, thanks so much. So we're going to start off and just talk about important dates and timelines, just to give us a background and base for which to base the rest of this presentation off of. And I just want to say this really does start, we're talking really end of spring, your junior spring, so through the summer, beginning of senior year, with the assumption that you've begun thinking about what colleges you want to attend, you've started building that college list, you've started brainstorming your personal statement and all of that. And if you haven't done those things yet, that's totally fine. Go back and watch a couple other webinars we have on our website that talk about those things, and you can get started that way. All right, so let's talk about a general timeline for kind of what happens in each of these time periods.
Awesome, cool. So I'll jump in here. So we have three kind of distinct time periods here. We have, again, like Hallie mentioned, late junior spring, late May, where we are now, early June. All set of doing that research. Hopefully there's a plan in place to potentially be doing some visits over the summer and even into the fall. I would actually encourage you, I know summer is a super popular time to go visit. If you can go in the fall, go in the summer just to get a sense, but also go in the fall to really solidify what is it like on this campus as a student. Oftentimes college campuses are pretty dead in the summer, or they have things going on that aren't necessarily indicative of what like a true day as a student there is like. And so I would recommend starting early with those visits, but also following up and really seeing, what is that like during an academic term at any given school you're interested in. This is a time to also continue taking standardized tests. Hopefully you've at least taken one, potentially 2 sittings of the SAT or ACT, if that's something that you are planning on submitting to schools. There's other webinars all about test prep, but I would just say you should know at this point whether or not you are planning on submitting scores. Most schools at this point are test optional and will be, at least for the foreseeable future. Some are not. But definitely something that needs to be happening, because if there are some tweaks that need to potentially be made to a test plan or tutoring or anything like that, you still will have a little bit of time to maybe retake in the summer, or worst case, early fall, one extra try at the test. Personal statement, definitely start to think about and really start to think about these first few drafts of your personal statement. With the Common Application, for example, which is one of the bigger platforms that students will apply to colleges on, they'll have kind of one main essay that you'll write and submit to all of your colleges. That's called, I want to tell you feedback you can get, the more iterations you can do of that, the better. And so starting early allows the trusted people in your life, whether it be a teacher, a parent, a friend, potentially a quad consultant. I do a lot of work on personal statements with students, someone to really just, look at it over and over again and give you feedback. That's perfect. And then the last thing, which is super big, and a lot of people don't think about this until their senior year, is letters of recommendation. I always highly encourage students to ask teachers to write their letters of rec before they leave school. This is for a number of reasons. A big reason is that you want to give your teachers enough time to be able to write the letter. A lot of teachers like to write their letters over the summer, and it really gives them time to write something strong instead of throwing something together when they have a million other things going on at the beginning of next school year. So definitely something to think about. We'll talk a little bit more about that and what goes into choosing and what you need to provide to them, et cetera. But definitely in that end of the school year period before school ends, try to request those letters of rec. Fast forward, we're in early senior fall. You are finalizing your personal statement and essays. So there'll be some supplemental essays that each individual school will send out, prompts that you'll need to fill out. You'll start to draft those. You'll submit your official transcripts, your SAT scores, ACT scores if you choose to. And then for early decision applicants, usually you'll have to submit your application sometime in early November. And so if you are going to be applying early, or early action, I should say, early decision and early action, if you're going to be applying early to any school, you really got to be ready to go by November. So that kind of cuts about a month and a half off of your timeline, if you are looking to do that. And then finally, between December and early January 2024, you'll be finalizing all of your applications for regular decisions, submitting, start to think more strongly about, do I need scholarships? Will I need finance? So sorry, I was just waiting for the slide to move, but I know that was a lot of information, so we'll go into the specifics in the coming slides. So this slide basically is breaking down the important dates that you need to know. We'll talk more about this later on in this webinar, but really the way I encourage, and I know most consultants encourage students to work on applications, is kind of planning backwards. Okay, what do we need to do? How many schools are we applying to? What are the tasks here? And then you work backwards and you make yourself a project plan for, the deadlines you need to meet. And so if you have, for example, let's figure out, am I going to be applying early action, early decision? Am I going to be applying for the second early decision deadline? Will I be applying regular decision? And then just knowing when the FAFSA opens in October. And so once you know these concrete dates, like I'm applying this deadline, then you can work backwards from, well, how many schools am I applying to? How many essays do I have, et cetera, et cetera.
Fantastic. And then also, it says it here, but to reiterate, schools all have different deadlines. These are the most common typical deadlines, but double check, triple check the deadlines for your school and program and make sure you have those written down. It can vary based on the school. All right, so now we're going to talk about finalizing your college list. We went over it briefly, but dive in a little bit more. And the next few topics we cover, we have webinars on these that you can go back and take a look at. So we're covering them a little bit briefly, and as it pertains to kind of summer, fall, senior year. So things to consider when you are narrowing down your list.
All right, Hallie, sorry, I think you froze for a second, so I jumped in. I apologize, but
We-
so some considerations here for again, as you're narrowing down that list. I think in a lot of ways this can be the most daunting part of the process because there are just so many schools. And if you're anything like most students I know that are a junior or senior in high school, you take the PSAT once, you take the SAT, and you're getting flooded with emails, mailings, all these things from different schools that are trying to tell you why they are the best school to come to. And so it can be hard to make those decisions. A big thing to keep in mind to kind of just ground yourself is figure out, okay, how many schools do I want to apply to? Some students may choose to apply to only 5 schools. Some students may apply to 15 or even, up to potentially 20 schools, depending on what you're looking for. Regardless of how many schools you're going to apply to, you absolutely need to have a good proportion of what we call likely or safety schools, target match schools, and then reach and far reach schools. And so kind of as they sound, these terms are pretty self-explanatory, but likely or safety is a school that it's like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get in here. It's not super competitive. I at least meet and oftentimes will exceed the average GPA, the average test scores, just what's kind of required of an applicant for that school. So you're pretty sure you're going to get in. And that way you have a really solid backup plan. It's a school that you would really enjoy attending, even though it's not your top choice. And so depending on how many schools total you apply to, I usually recommend 2 to 3 of those in your list. Target schools or match schools is where you really fall right in that sweet spot. I'm right in that kind of mid-range between 25th, 75th percentile SAT, ACT score. I'm right in that middle range of GPA. I'm not, I don't have the best GPA in the list, but I also don't have the worst. I'm right kind of where they're targeting. So you have a pretty good shot of getting into these schools, but there is a chance for whatever reason you aren't able to get in. But this is the kind of school that you're really hoping to match with. That's about 3 to 5 of your schools. So really, I would say the majority. And then you have reach and far reach. Reach schools are those schools that, potentially you are maybe on the lower end of the GPA and test score ranges for those schools. And so it's a little bit less likely you'll get in. I recommend 2 to 3 of these schools. And a lot of students will, really want, especially students who have very competitive profiles, might want to apply to more of these schools. And so definitely 2 to 3 likely safety, definitely 3 to 5 target or match. And then, a lot of students really just want to go all out. They want to apply to every competitive school under the sun and see, if they can get into schools with those really low acceptance rates. That's great. That's awesome. I usually don't encourage that because, a big thing that a lot of admissions officers will see is, if you're applying to a school just because it has a big name. And so I always rag on Harvard, and I know that that's a big name that a lot of people know, and that's the big name I grew up with being from Boston. And so I always kind of use that as an example, but it's, the question I ask is, do you really want to go to Harvard? And this is a real example for me, right? I didn't really want to go to Harvard. I was just told that that was the most incredible school growing up. And so my application, when it came time to apply, I was like, I don't really have much to say. I don't really know that I love, any particular club they have here. I don't know that I love like the academic structure that they're showing, right? Harvard's a great school. It's really well known, but what do I have to say here, right? For me, that would have been a waste of time. So I highly encourage you to really think, do I want to go to this school because it's a big name, or do I want to go to this school because there's something specific about it that I like? And that can be, I really felt a great sense of community. Like that's enough of a reason. But if you don't have enough of a reason to really be able to speak to that in an essay or in an interview, I wouldn't encourage you applying to just every top school under the sun to shoot your shot. Really be intentional about the top schools and the elite schools, the reach schools that you're applying to. That way you can give your best shot, because at the end of the day, if you apply to 10 schools just because they're great names and they're top 10 ranked, you probably won't have a good shot of getting in because your applications are just going to be watered down. You only have so much time to write a strong essay. Really, I would say, to use the cliche, put all of your eggs in very few baskets to really get the best return. Yeah, and so that, I guess that's the third bullet point. You should just really be excited about any of these schools. And if you're not super excited about it for the right reasons, I would cut it from your list.
Thank you. That was a lot of amazing information. And I really liked how you talked about, not applying to school just because of the name or it's a pretty campus. And then also just want to add that a lot of times I think safety schools are given a bad rap. They're thought about as the schools you don't want to go to, but are your fallbacks. But you really should be excited about those as well. And you want to make sure that you're putting your best effort into your application. And there's so many amazing schools where you can grow and have an amazing time, even if they're not, an Ivy League. So let's talk a little bit about letters of recommendation.
All right, awesome. So this is huge. And if you are, I assume a lot of people here are current juniors who are like, I'm ready for this, what's coming next? And so if you are this is the time, and I already mentioned this. So really start to think about, if you haven't already, who you want to ask, and start to potentially ask them now and before the end of the school year. People always ask, well, who should I pick? Who should I pick? There's a lot of things that come into play here. I think at the end of the day, you're going to want a teacher that knows you very well. And it says here, right, knows you well, speaks to your strengths, and they're enthusiastic about writing you a letter. And so that's the thing. You may ask a teacher, and I've been a high school teacher in this position before. I know what it's like to unfortunately not be comfortable writing a letter of recommendation for a student, either because I didn't know them well enough, or I just didn't see, I didn't see them engaging in my class in the same way that potentially they engaged in other classes, right? And so, sometimes the student would come to me and say, well, I really need a math teacher's letter of rec, and I would have to say no. And if a teacher says no to you, that's okay. That's better that they're saying no than for them to write a letter of rec that isn't going to paint you in a good light. And so all of that to say, definitely ask, and make sure that this is someone that will be really enthusiastic about writing you a letter. Usually it's teachers. Sometimes, a lot of the time, you'll need a guidance counselor recommendation, and you'll meet with them. That's oftentimes a little bit more formal because most high school students, there's 100 students per guidance counselor, something like that, and you don't have as close of a relationship. And so that'll just be kind of more of a formality. But definitely you're going to want teachers that potentially you've had, if you've had a teacher more than 1 year in high school, that's always a good person to ask. If you've maybe had a teacher that's also mentored you for a club or has coached you in a sport, always a good person to ask as well, because they know you in multiple contexts. If you're applying to a specific type of program, that's another thing to think about. For example, if you want to go pre-med, you're going to want at least one STEM teacher to kind of speak to your ability to, tackle challenging science and mathematics content. You can absolutely have an English, humanities, social studies teacher write for you, but you're going to want at least one person that can kind of speak to the thing that you're saying that you want to study. Going in undecided to a liberal arts school is a little bit different. You don't necessarily need one person or the other. But you definitely want someone, again, that knows you very well. And so think about, am I applying to a chemistry major at the, at a big state school that has specific, that's a research university that has specific schools that I'm applying to, or am I just applying to go to a liberal arts school and kind of figure out my major when I get there? And so if you're going to make the case for yourself that you're going to be some certain major, you absolutely want someone who can speak on, if you are able to handle that content and if you're excited about it. But at the end of the day, it's, someone who knows you well and can speak to your strengths. Another thing I would add, and I want to keep this brief, I know we're spending a lot of time on this slide, but another thing that's so important is you don't have to pick the teacher that you have the best grade in their class. I have seen such strong letters of recommendation coming from students who are like, I started with a C in this class and I hated math going into it. And I just worked really hard. I showed up to office hours. That's the story that people want to hear, right? It's not about, I got an A and I didn't work very hard for it, or I got an A and I worked very hard for it, but the teacher didn't really know me. I would rather see, and I think admissions officers would rather see a letter that says, hey, this student really struggled, but they were in my office every day. they got a tutor, they can speak to that growth arc, that helps them know you really well. And so don't think, well, I struggled in this class, I got a B, I don't want them to see that. That's okay. If there's a story to be told, especially one of work ethic and growth, definitely tap into that as well. And then finally, I know that this is a little bit, I would say, newer. I think over the past few years, this has become more and more popular, but not everybody has necessarily heard of a brag sheet. That's the biggest thing that can really help your teachers when they're writing their letter of recommendation for you. And so again, I'll just tell you from a teacher's perspective, writing letters I taught AP statistics, and I had some juniors ask me for letters of recommendation. There were some that I had super close relationships with, and I knew that they were on, the basketball team, and I knew that they were in X, Y, and Z clubs. But when you teach 100 kids, let me tell you, it's so hard in that moment to remember every little detail about every kid, even if you are very close, and you really have a good relationship. And so for you to lay all of that out on a piece of paper and say, hey, I'm in these clubs, I'm in these extracurriculars, I am taking these classes, here's what I want to do, here's what I want to major in, my career goals, that helps me write a much stronger letter of rec than trying to remember when I'm sitting there probably in the summer and I haven't even seen you, everything about you. The other thing about a brag sheet that I would love to say, and I have a template I usually share with my students, and I know a lot of other consultants do as well. Don't only tell them what you've done, tell them what that shows about you. And so I like to break it down into a couple of different categories. So one of them is leadership, character, academics, right? And so don't just say, I've taken 4 AP classes and gotten A's in them. Say, I am really interested in going into pre-med, right, as a major. I have taken AP biology, AP chemistry, AP physics. I have really dedicated myself to STEM, right? So that shows, not only does it show work ethic, it also shows interest in the subject you're interested in, right? So to be able to clearly lay out for your teachers, here's all the things that I'm proud of about myself, here's all these qualities, and here's the evidence for that. That just helps them write a super strong letter of rec. You're not going to be able to see these. Most likely, they're not going to show it to you before they send it. They're technically not supposed to. And so you want to be able to give them as much concrete, like, here's what I would like you to say about me, as possible. And that way you can really control that narrative and not just kind of hope that they think you're great and know all these things about you. So yeah, brag sheet. And then if you have a copy of your personal statement, definitely attach it, even if it's just a draft. And a resume as well. A resume will just kind of give that more clear picture of things that maybe didn't make the brag sheet.
Fantastic. That's a lot of amazing information, and especially coming from you, having been at both sides of that, both writing recommendation letters, helping students ask for them, you've had to ask for them. You gave it a lot of really great context. But I think key thing here is, like, ask early. People are busy. You want them to be able to dedicate enough time. We talked about Dominique talked about just about all of this, but just a couple extra tips.
Yeah, I think a couple things I missed. One, check in with them periodically. So teachers, again, are humans, and they're very, very busy humans that are responsible for, again, hundreds of other humans. And so definitely, like, stuff can get lost in our inboxes. It's really tough sometimes. And so don't be afraid to just nudge your teacher, like, hey, have you submitted it? Hey, it's due pretty soon. Just so they are on top of it. They're never, well, I shouldn't say never. They will most likely, if they're like me and any of my colleagues and anyone I've worked with, they will not get mad at you. It's just genuinely that we need that reminder sometimes because things get lost. So don't be afraid to do that. And then always be sure to thank them. A lot of time and effort goes into putting together really strong letters of recommendation. I know, the students that I've written for, again, I've been very close with them and I've really wanted the best for them. And so I do spend a lot of time really poring over them. Just like a little note is awesome, just to really be able to show your appreciation when the process is all over.
All right. So let's talk about your personal statement. And we just finished a 3-webinar series on personal statements. Those are for free on our website. You can feel free to go watch those. And those talk about taking those initial steps of writing your personal statement. So we're not talking about brainstorming here. We're talking about, finalizing it and wrapping it up. But let's dive into this.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is not something, again, for time's sake, I don't want to get caught into talking too much about this because this is just a whole thing on its own. But big things to think about over the summer, you're going to want to be drafting just, even if your topic changes, right? So the Common App usually puts out, and they've stayed the same the last couple of years, they put out their essays and they say, okay, here's your 6 essay prompts you can choose from. Almost always, and definitely this year, there's always kind of a last one on the list that says write about whatever you want. So at the end of the day, this is very, very open-ended. And so they try to give you some ideas, but it can be kind of anything that you want it to be to tell a story about yourself. And so the best way to get the best kind of, image of yourself out there, what you want to show colleges, is to write many, many times, get feedback from a lot of different people, get feedback from your childhood best friend that's known you forever, get feedback from your teacher who can just help you with writing conventions and really help you make a little bit more of a compelling case for yourself. The more you draft, the better it's going to be. So absolutely start early, and then, edit some more. That's really everything, on the personal statement front.
Fantastic. And again, we could spend, a whole year's worth of webinars on personal statements alone. But around this time, you just want to be wrapping them up and continuing to just look through them, check for spelling, have everyone, check for spelling, then check again. There's always something you'll miss. All right, so something that doesn't get talked about too much is your senior year course load. And as you're starting your senior year, you'll want to think about the classes you'll be taking and how those will balance with all of the million other things that you are doing.
Awesome. Yeah, so senior year course load. I think most of you, again, if you're juniors right now, you've gone through this process already. And so hopefully you've chosen the right courses. If not, I'm sure there's some time to make changes, but most of the things that I would say here, I think the biggest thing is, don't forget that senior fall counts. I think there's so much emphasis on junior year, and I've got to take all these classes because this is going to be the thing. This is kind of like the culminating part of my high school experience before applications start. Yes, that is true, but schools will receive your first semester's transcripts in the application process, and they will absolutely receive your final grades at the end of the year, whether you've gotten in or not. And so they're going to want to see that you're keeping up with the rigorous courses that you've been taking. And so, yes, your senior fall will be super busy. You're going to be applying to college. You're going to have a lot going on. And so I would say balance it out. Don't stop taking rigorous courses because you feel like it doesn't matter anymore. Obviously, that shows kind of that you're only doing it for the college applications. It just doesn't paint a super good picture. And so make sure, if you're an AP level student, you're still taking some APs, you're still kind of moving ahead. You don't have a ton of open gaps, but maybe leave yourself an extra, if you can opt into an extra study hall, that could be really helpful. So don't overload yourself, absolutely. But also really think about, the academic picture you're painting of yourself, because at least those first semester courses are absolutely going to be taken into account, and showing that continued motivation and commitment to whatever it is going to be really important. Obviously take all the classes you need to graduate, and then any required classes for the programs to which you are applying. And so this can mean a lot of things. So a lot of things high school students don't understand, and I didn't understand, was there's a huge difference between, again, a liberal arts college and a research university. So research universities are broken down into smaller colleges, and you apply to a very specific program within that college. So I guess an example that's top of mind, I was talking yesterday with a student about University of California, Berkeley. That is a research university. They have a number of different schools. So they have their School of Business. We were talking about the School of Chemistry, School of Engineering, right? So you're going to be applying to a very specific school and saying, all right, I'm going to be a business major. I'm going to be an engineering major. Those types of schools are going to potentially require, okay, if you want to go into engineering, for example, you've taken X, Y, and Z math classes, you've taken X, Y, and Z science classes, right? So you really need to, if that's kind of a career path that you want to take, you really want to make sure that what schools are asking for. Other schools, again, if you're going to go liberal arts, you're going to go to your Harvard College, your Dartmouth, Columbia, kind of like the Ivy League route. You just go in and you'll declare your major when you get there. It's not as important. But they still do want to see that you've taken an interest in some subject and that you've really pushed the rigor, whether it's taking an honors or an AP or whatever other class you want to take. So just make sure to keep that in mind. Staying organized, it's always super tough, but like I said, if you work with a quad consultant, they will help you put together what we call a project tracker, where you track all of your dates and deadlines kind of backwards from what you when you need to submit your applications, and that way that'll just kind of help you stay on track. But definitely, set goals for yourself, set calendar, and whatever you need to do, just really try to stay organized, because it will be a lot. And so hopefully you can come up with some sort of system for that. And then take care of yourself. Again, it's going to be a lot. So make sure you're staying active, seeing friends, seeing family, managing the stress. It's tough. There's no other way to put it. I remember going through it. I'm 5 years out of college now. So this was like 10 years ago for me. And I still remember like waking up in the middle of the night stressed about like what school I was going to go to. So I know it's a hard time. But like what Hallie said at the beginning, even if it's, your safety school, which gets this rap about being the worst case scenario, I don't want to go there. Make sure that's a school that you like, even if it's not a top ranked school or a school you're like, I've always dreamed about going here. Make sure you find a school that you're confident you can get into, that you've at least visited and been like, all right, I could live here. Seems like a cool community. It seems like they have some cool clubs. I could do this, and you'll still get a ton out of it. So just having that kind of peace of mind of not, if I don't get into this school, my life is over, knowing like, all right, no matter what, I'm going to be okay, really changes the process. So definitely keep that in mind.
Fantastic. All right, so let's talk about college applications. And we're going to focus on the Common App here. There's obviously some schools use their own application systems. The UC schools use their own, and they're all they all have this information.
Yeah. So Common Application, I would say, is the most widely used application system, which is why we talk about it. There's a couple of others. Again, the UC schools have their own system. Some schools have their own, like literally one school, you're going to write a whole separate set of essays. But at the end of the day, Common Application, you're probably going to apply to at least one school that accepts the Common App. And so big thing to know is that it opens on August 1st every year. And so you absolutely want to create your account and get set up and ready to go as early as possible. That way you can fill in all of the stuff that honestly just like needs to get out of the way, right? Your information about yourself, your demographics, your household information, academic history, extracurricular activities. These aren't as challenging. It's more of just like, let me put in my information. There's no editing. There's no kind of like spinning it or writing something creative or anything like that. It's really just, let me list it all out. Get that done as soon as possible. That'll just be something off your plate. Then you can really focus on the creative kind of time intensive pieces of writing the essays, writing the supplemental essays. And so that's the thing. If you're not familiar, the Common Application, like I said, you could Google it right now. Even though the Common App isn't open, they've already said all of our essay prompts are saying the exact same as last year. You can already get started on it. And then even if you don't want to use one of their essay prompts, they've also already said you can write about whatever you want. So you can already get started on that essay. The thing that you won't necessarily see until you log in and start this process are the supplements. And so what you'll do is you'll say, okay, I've done all of this information. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to click, I want to apply to Berkeley. I want to apply to Stanford. I want to apply to Harvard, right? Whatever. And then it'll say, great, you're applying to Harvard. Here's your 3 things that we want to know, right? 3 250-word essays about blank, blank, and blank, right? And those are going to go specifically to Harvard. And then you'll have another set that'll go specifically to your next school. And so it's going to be all these short essays, but it'll really rack up, because writing like a 1 to 2 paragraph essay 2 or 3 times per school, I mean, you can do the math on that. That's like many, many hours of writing. And so again, get this part done first, get the narrative done first. And that way, when you're in the Common App and you're having all these supplemental essays pop up for you, you still have the time and space and capacity to write many different drafts of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And if you get your personal statement done before this, you have so much more time to focus on those essays and your schoolwork and everything else. All right, so we're going to talk about staying organized, and then after this, we are going to open up the Q&A. So feel free to keep popping in your questions, and we'll give you some good tricks for staying organized through this process.
All right, awesome. So yeah, I think again, planning early and just know what's going on. Know your deadlines, know what you need for each school. Do the reading, attend an information session if you can. A lot of these are done virtually now. And so even if you could just sit for an hour in front of your computer and just have someone, it's easier for you. I'm definitely an auditory person. I need to like hear it said to me. And so it's easier for you to have someone say to you, the application's due this day. Here's how you need to apply, blah, blah, blah. That's great. If you just need to go to the website, just know what's up. Again, I think one of the benefits of working with someone on our team is that we do a lot of that work for you. And can just kind of double check. So it kind of takes that stress off. And so, it's not like, oh man, I wrote down the wrong date and now I can't apply. We kind of go through and triple check and write those things down for you and just kind of help you do that planning. If you're going to do this on your own, that's great too, though. Just make sure you kind of, again, know and have triple checked everything for yourself. Setting goals, like I said, backwards plan. So say I'm going to apply to 10 schools. Here they are. Here's their deadlines. And so I'm going to say, I'm going to have my first draft of the essays for Harvard done by this day. And then I'm going to give it to so-and-so to edit. And then I'm going to have a second draft back to them by blank. So if you really just set those like individual goals and deadlines for yourself, it'll be a lot easier to keep track than, just kind of sitting around and thinking about it and potentially procrastinating because you don't have a set timeline for when you want to work. Calendars, spreadsheets, all these things. We use Google Drive here at Quad to keep everything organized. And I do think it's super helpful to have just like a folder where you can dump everything and just subfolders and making sure, maybe this is my Harvard application. I keep saying Harvard. Again, I'm sorry, I always rag on it. This is my application folder for Harvard. This is my application folder for NYU, wherever you're applying. And then check in on your goals, deadlines, requirements, have a point person. So if you're not going to work with a consultant, like tap someone in your life, maybe a trusted teacher, a parent, a guidance counselor, someone that you can check in with and just be like, here's my progress, here's where I'm at, and just have someone that can kind of help hold you accountable if you need that. I think that's everything for that.
I think so. I think this is one of those, everyone does better in different ways with organization. Some people need the spreadsheet, some people need to actually write things out on a physical paper calendar, whatever you need to keep yourself organized. And if you need like an accountability buddy, if you need your parents or friends kind of check in with you on that, like definitely put those things in place. This is kind of a massive undertaking. There's so many moving parts. You want to make sure that you're not forgetting anything. All right, so thanks all for joining us. I know we covered a ton of information. We have some great questions in the Q&A already. Feel free to keep popping those in and we'll just start going through these. Additionally, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. We are recording this webinar and we'll send it out in an email later this week, just in case you missed anything, want to go back and rewatch parts of it. All right. So let's see. Can you explain the difference between the early decisions? So we talked at the beginning of this about applying early decision, early action, and regular decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of different types of applications that you can submit to schools. So early decision, I think the best way to put it is that is a binding decision. So you're applying to this school and you're saying, I love it here so much that if you say yes to me, I am 100% set on coming here. That's it. I'm pulling my applications from everywhere else. So you'll apply usually at the beginning of November, beginning to mid-November. Every school is different, but that's roughly when the deadlines usually fall. And then you'll typically find out whether you've gotten in or not before winter break. So before January 1st for that year. Early action, on the other hand, is I'm going to apply early. I'm going to apply at that November deadline. I'm still going to find out in December, but I don't have to go. And so that's a really solid choice for honestly any school, because you can apply to as many schools as you want early action because it's not binding. And you can just have that peace of mind. So maybe you choose a couple of safety schools. Like I'm definitely, okay, I got in, perfect. I'm good to go. I know I'm going somewhere next year, and that takes a little bit of the pressure and stress off. I know there's also something called, I don't think this was mentioned, but there's also something called binding early action, where again, this is binding to go to that school, but you're also able to apply to other schools early. So you can apply to other schools early action, but you do have to go if you do get into that school binding early action. I think that was everything. And then regular decision is just kind of the usual deadline.
Awesome. And then I think did you mention that early decision 2 or early action 2, which is just a second date of that?
Yeah, early, sorry. I think that's what I meant to also say. Early decision 2 is again, it's like, I'm still binded. I have to go here, but it's a second round of that. So if for whatever reason you missed that deadline, but you're like, you know what, I really want to go here, it can slightly increase your odds just because you're making it very clear to that school, I'm 100%. If I get in, that's it. And so again, it's like the decision's been made. You have to go there. And so you're kind of just telling that school, like, you're my first choice, which can help because they want to see that commitment.
Fantastic. All right. So knowing, your GPA, your test scores and schools, kind of average test scores and GPAs, can you just briefly go over again how to bucket those schools into reach, target, and safety?
Yeah. So this can be very nuanced in a lot of ways. There's like a lot of kind of gray area. But basically what you want to look at is percentile rank. And so you can look this up. The College Board has a great website where you can look up kind of the middle 50% of scores and GPAs for schools. And so middle 50% being, I did, let's say the SAT range is 1,400 to 1,550, right? So that means 25% of people did worse than 1,400, 25% of people did better than 1,550. And then that middle 50% is like on average where people are. And so usually, right, if you're well above that range, if you're well above, that 75th percentile, that's going to be usually a safety school for you. You're pretty likely to get in. If you're in that sweet spot, that's going to usually be a target school for you. And this is for both test scores and GPA. And then if you're below that, if you're in that like lower 25th, 25% of people that, for test scores or GPA, usually that's going to be more of a reach school for you. That's usually how I explain it. Some people explain it in different ways. That's what I go off of. But there's kind of a lot of ways to think about that. And it's also not a guarantee, right? There could be a safety school that they don't like your essay, or maybe you didn't put enough effort in your essay because you said it was a safety school, right? So it's not 100%, like what we were saying. Don't take it for granted. And same thing with reach, right? Like you may get into 2 of your reach schools and you may not get into one of your match schools, right? Just because there's so many factors at play here. But again, we roughly try to balance the lists in this way, but it doesn't necessarily mean, yes, I'm getting in. No, I'm not.
All right. So for the SAT, should we take it another time over the summer? If you took 2 in your junior year and 1 in sophomore year for a baseline, will colleges see that you took it 4 times if you do the summer one? And is it bad if they see that you've taken it multiple times? So I think 2 parts of that question. Should you take it over the summer, even if you've already taken it a few times before? And then if you took it twice in your junior year, once in your sophomore year, does it matter that you took it that number of times? Do colleges care if you took it 4 times?
No. Short answer is no. Short answer is no, that colleges don't care. Short answer is yes, that you should take it again. So there's a lot to unpack here. SAT, a couple of quick things that you need to know about your schools. So when I'm making a college list for a student, I'm kind of separating out a lot of information for them. Two things that are absolutely go on that list are, one, is this school test optional, right? So do I even need to submit test scores? And then two, if I do choose to submit test scores, or if I have to submit test scores in any case, is it a school that super scores? Super score means they're going to take your best score out of each section of your test, and combine them together to make a new score. And so, for example, if you're going to sit for the SAT, and let's say, on the reading section, you get a 1600, and on the math section, you get an 800, right? And then the next time you take it and it flips. Well, on the reading section, you got an 800, and then on the math section, you got a 1600. A school that super scores will see that in your score report, and they'll count you as a perfect score, even though both times you only got one section perfect and you actually got significantly lower on the other section. So that's definitely something to consider. And so if you're looking at schools that are either requiring SAT, or you definitely want to submit the scores because you think you're a pretty strong applicant with the scores, look at if they super score. If you're happy with your super score, so when you combine your best section scores to make a new score, I wouldn't take it again if you're happy with it. But if you do want to take it again, you are more than welcome to. I have only ever heard, people talk favorably about students who take the SAT many times and do a lot better, right? So improvement's awesome, right? It just shows work ethic, it shows commitment. There's no reason why they'd be like, why did they take it so many times? They clearly don't know what they're doing. Like, that's not the narrative that gives. It's more, wow, they really committed to this. They really studied, they problem solved, and, they came out with whatever score it is. So definitely depends. You may not need to take it again, but there's no harm in doing so if you feel as though you could improve.
All right. And it looks like we have another question just to clarify that answer. So does it matter if you send the best score? I think, yes, it does matter. You do want to send the best score. Or is it better to send both scores if you have one better score? And I think you answered that, and it depends on if they super score.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I mean, there's no need to send the worst score, right? But if they super score, and if sending that worst score is going to help you because you have some sort of like anomaly that's a really high section score, I would send both.
Awesome. And then I know this is a question we get a lot, so I want to make sure we cover it. So even if it's if the school is test optional, do you recommend submitting the score? And
that's a great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think you touched on it slightly, but I think just a clarification would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So if the school is test optional, it very much depends on if this is going to make you a stronger applicant or not, essentially. So if you are someone who's like, standardized tests are not my thing, I really struggle with them, I don't think it's a good indicator of my academic potential, my performance, don't submit. But if it is your thing and it's like really a spot where you shine, absolutely, I would encourage you to submit. I know like a natural follow-up question for students is like, well, what score is a good score, right? Like, what score should I submit versus not submit? I think that's tough, and it depends on the schools you're applying to, right? If that school is going to put you at that top 25% of kids and like really set you apart, totally submit it. But if it's going to show that you're potentially on the lower end of this spectrum for whatever schools you're applying to, that might not help your case. That might actually potentially hurt it. So definitely kind of keep that in mind. But if you do have a really high score, absolutely submit.
Right. I did misread the last question. So the question was not about whether or not to send the better or worse score. Is it if you took the SAT and ACT, should you send both of them or the better score of the two?
It's just the better one. It doesn't matter. So if you're asking if there's like a preference, most schools don't have a preference. Again, at this point, most schools don't only not have a preference, they actually just don't really care about seeing scores at all. And so there's really no reason to submit a lower score. You can very quickly Google like SAT to ACT score conversion to kind of see what's a comparable score and just send whatever one's higher.
All right.
I'm sorry, before we move on, I just want to jump in. I want to clarify something. I think I made a mistake. I'm just realizing when I was talking about early action, so I mentioned early decision, early action, and then I said binding early action. I meant to say restrictive early action. Restrictive early action, I said the wrong thing. So it's backwards. You are not binded to going to the school, but you may not apply early anywhere else. And so that's the difference. And so you can apply early, but that's the only school you can apply early to, but you still don't have to go if you get in. So it's kind of like a hybrid between early decision and early action. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I realized that I totally messed that up.
Awesome. Thanks for the clarification. All right. Speaking of early applications, do you recommend submitting early acceptance applications for reach schools?
Yes. And I think it depends on how much of a reach it is for you. So I'll give a very personal example. I'll think 10 years back, which is crazy. But so when I was applying myself, so I gave you all this narrative of, growing up in Boston, it was Harvard, all, that was where I wanted to go. Where I ended up going was Dartmouth, right? Which in the rankings and in acceptance rate is only slightly kind of below that, as far as slightly below in the rankings and a little bit higher of an acceptance rate, but still very much a reach school for me. Dartmouth is a reach school for anybody, right? Dartmouth's acceptance rate is like hovers around 10%-ish every year. And so even someone with a absolutely perfect, flawless record, that will be a reach school and they may or may not get in. I knew I had enough of a shot because again, I was in that middle range, that between 25th and 75th percentile, but it was still kind of a shot in the dark as to whether I was going to get in or not. So for me, yes, it was a reach, but I knew that I had a chance. And I did apply early decision because I knew I wanted to go there. And I think that went a long way because like I said, I was not by any means a top applicant for Dartmouth. I didn't have above average SAT scores. I had average for Dartmouth. I didn't have above average grades. I had average scores for Dartmouth, right? So that wasn't setting me apart. It was certainly putting me in the pool, but it wasn't setting me apart. And so I think one thing that I did to help myself is say, I loved this school. I loved the community. This is where I want to go. I actually love it here. It's not just, some dream I had. It's not just some like ranking on a list. Like I actually really loved my tour and the community there. I'm going to put my eggs in this basket and I'm going to tell Dartmouth, you are my first choice. I really like you. I want you, essentially, right? And so it makes it a lot harder for them to say no to me when I have like made it very clear to them that they are the school I want to go to. And so if you have that experience where you're like, this is it, I love it here. I had the best time on my tour. I could talk to you all day about definitely don't kind of pigeonhole yourself into that. Again, apply early action to as many places as you want to get that kind of assurance. But most of the highly competitive schools, I would say, do early decision because they want to kind of like know that you're going there.
Thank you so much. That was a really great answer. We only have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. So if we weren't able to get to your question today, I very much apologize. Feel free to reach out to us and hopefully we can answer those for you outside of this. But let's see. So are there specific traits that you should ask your recommenders to highlight in their letters of recommendation? So if you have like specific narratives you want to cover.
This is the alumni interviewers. And I took a lot away from that. And a big thing that I always tell students, I kind of break it down into 4 buckets. And so that's literally what I'll put on this brag sheet template. And so, I don't have the time to like pull it up and show you right now. I wish I could, but basically that way. Personal qualities, academic commitment, extracurriculars, and then impact on your community. So how have you impacted the community within your extracurricular involvements? And then leadership skills. And so it's kind of those 4 buckets. And so then you can kind of break that down into, okay, my personal traits are I'm a hard worker, I collaborate well, I'm mature, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll put evidence, right, for why you are all of those things. So I have shown that I am collaborative in my student council club where I work as blank with X, Y, and Z people to accomplish this, right? And that's kind of where you break it down, but it's really those 4 buckets. And I would encourage you, I know these are posted, like go back and look at that interviewing webinar because I talk a lot about those 4 main key buckets. And again, that's Dartmouth. I don't want to speak to every college, right? But that is a very good example, I think, of a framework you can use for like the big kind of key things that schools are looking for as far as, a complete application and a complete resume.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you here, Dominique, as always. Thank you so much for all of this information. And thank you for, stepping up and doing the presentation solo here. And everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you all. Keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll be sending out this webinar later this week. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of their week and weekends.
Thank you all.